People are speaking. Yeah, and the sound is really good.
I'm going to do this. I'm going to be a little bit of this today, just for now, to welcome you all back from the International Conversation. And here we're going to start talking about the technological context, which I think is going to be really rich and exciting. And I want to acknowledge that we've been talking a lot since 10 a.m. and listening a lot, paying attention a lot. And so you might be feeling that in your body, you might be feeling that in your soul, you might have had a Diet Coke on the break like me, and maybe a little bit of that. So I'm gonna plan to wrap this up around 75 minutes instead of 90 minutes. But if it's like really fruitful and like energetic, then we'll keep going.
If we're interesting.
If you're interested.
So everybody goes thumbs. Here are the 75 minutes.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah, exactly. But we're going to use the same format. So after about half an hour, we'll add some more chairs, and we invite you to come in. Those who have been listening to come in and be talkers, and those who have been talking to go out and listen. I will stay, though, as the boss. That's just the way it goes. Unsurprising, but a benevolent leader, I hope. A benevolent leader. So I'm turning my back to all of you, but I'm still loving you all back. I'm going to start, and I'm going to go to my left and ask you to introduce yourself.
Great.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, my name is Jared Mazzacci. I'm a multimedia theater maker, predominantly as a director, sometimes as a projections designer. During the pandemic, I was doing a lot of digital work, focusing specifically on liveness. Everything must be live, one made online, and an interrogation of co-presence and what does it mean to gather online. Simultaneously, for the last 10 years, I've been running a children's theater, an experimental children's theater in New Hampshire, focusing on new work and multimedia work. And in the pandemic, we went online and made a bunch of online projects. We made 322 projects in 14 weeks with 91 artists worldwide, and won the Governor's Award in the state of New Hampshire for innovation in that, which completely changed my thinking about online performance making. Lastly, I was a professor at the University of Maryland for 14 years, tenured, and left as of last year to kind of pursue a space less rigid in the systems of U.S. academics. So
welcome to Canada.
Yeah. So I'm very excited to be here right now. Yeah. Mic drop. Yeah.
Sure. My name is Laura Levin. I'm a professor in the theater, dance, and performance program at York University. I'm also the director of Sensorium, which is a research center on digital arts and technology. And and I'm an artist scholar artist who cares about many different things, but particularly the intersections of political performance and technology. And really pleased to be part of this conversation.
Hi everyone. My name is Patrick Blencarn, and I am an artist from Ottawa, Canada.
Really?
Are you?
Yeah, I'm from Ottawa too.
We'll play that after.
Okay.
and love learning new things. For the last number of years, I have been working on projects that heavily involve games with collaborators like Milton Lim, Laurel Green, who's also part of this festival, and Cole Lewis, who I'm here with this week. And these projects have really centered on the idea of welcoming gaming culture or games and all of their dramaturgies and how they would affect temporality, social contracts into theater spaces. The biggest of those projects is called Asses Masses, and it travels the world right now in 10 languages. It's an 8-hour video game played on stage by one audience member at a time, but there's 200 backseat gamers yelling at them, and a lot of, I would say, as I look back on, well, where did these projects come from? I'm a bookmaker, paper maker, like I'm a very materialist kind of person, like material matter, not like the other kind of materialist. But there's a through line of trying to look at technologies as things that bring us together and that we that have their own sort of scripting of our behaviors, and trying to understand how by welcoming these other forms into theatrical spaces we might radically change what how we relate to each other, and particularly on subjects of like democratic collaboration. That is my main focus probably right now.
I'm the person who keeps interrupting. I'm Lisa. Nice to be in space with all of you. I work predominantly as a director. I directed the piece that's here called Windrush that incorporates a lot of projections and sound as part of the storytelling. In my creative practice, I am constantly looking at bringing things of different disciplines together. So sometimes that's ballet, sometimes it's journalists, sometimes it's actors, sometimes it's film, sometimes it's whatever. It could really be anything, but breaking down those silos and bringing those things together. I also work as a movement teacher or an educator at Toronto Metropolitan University.
Thank you so much.
Welcome so much.
So we had a pre-meeting, and we had a very, very wide and far-ranging discussion. So I am really excited about what's about to happen. And I'm going to say, like, there are very few rules. I'm going to be a light-handed moderator here. So I'm not necessarily going to, like, tell you when to talk and it's your turn. Like, if you are feeling that you want to add to something, please do. And then we'll just try not to interrupt each other unless, I don't know. I know, rules are made too broken. But we'll see. I might interrupt you if I feel like you're going on too long, which might not be you. I'm watching you all. Anyway.
75 minutes.
75 minutes. Sorry about this morning. Okay, so it is a little punchy in here. How are you? This is my opening gambit question. We're working with these technologies. The technologies are not for profits, right? They are developed, marketed, built for people somewhere is going to make a lot of money off of the hour, off of Facebook, off of live streaming. Like, these things are not for profits. So in a world that we live in where the dominant culture really values consumerism, really values materialism in that other definition, really values capitalism, and how are we, and I think that there's a bit of a shared ideology here about resistance to those values. So I'm wondering, like, how are you seeing artists using technology to subvert those dominant values in interesting ways or uninteresting ways, because ideas build, right? So that's my opening gambit. It's a pick-up stick moment.
Something I brought up in our conversation that I've been thinking a lot about in these conversations today have been how the pandemic time period sort of ripped this question open and allowed us to see a bit of an exposure towards what the dominant culture, when they are down, what surfaces. And particularly in the US, when all of the Lord theaters, when all of the brick and mortars were down, their narrative was theater is dead and theater can't. And all of the performance artists picked up the sticks and actually were like, we're used to non-systematic performance making, and this seems natural to us and organic to us. And watching that kind of debate of what is and isn't allowed was actually like great exposure to see all of our biases in that moment. And so it's not really it's just, that's the thought that I've been thinking about, is like what I learned 5 years ago is actually a lot of the answer that I'm thinking about today, is really just questioning the dominant culture and what the narrative is that they want us to think about, and how do we resist that, which is why stepping out of systems is so exciting to me, to be like, what if we're over here entirely, as opposed to just trying to fix the thing that keeps being told to us that it's broken, you know? And online dissolved brick and mortar. Online dissolved a lot of the things because it allowed all of us to start connecting in a lot of ways. So that became a very exciting space.
If I can just say, I think one of your questions is then, you know, as someone who self-identifies as, you know, one of those weirdos who always was sort of trying to make stuff that didn't fit into the box, and then the question of what platforms do you use, and, you know, again, like, okay, now we have the ability to use these tools. You know, I'll just say I should name the things that I'm both like actively choose to, and the things that I feel like forced to use. I started working with Unity like a number of years ago, and at that time Unity was a very different thing. It was like a little bit smaller than it was today, and they tried to become one of the big baddies like a couple of years ago by forcing everyone to pay who was using the platform. Everyone's like nodding, they're like, yeah, that was a terrible time. And then they repealed, and actually, like, you know, this is a good example where like a mass population of users said you can't do this because it sort of contradicted certain foundational principles of the platform. So there are like these examples where, by virtue of all of us jumping on board with something, that party got tempted to become, you know, more capitalistic or more consumerist in its goals, and there was like a demonstrative response. You know, there was actually like an example of listening. I feel like in most of our other examples, like Adobe, I am a digital serf to Adobe, and I can't really get out of that right now, given the projects that I'm working with, and I don't have a lot of choices about that, and so I'm not actually here to say like, but I figured it out. No, I actually don't know, and if anybody knows how, I mean, I know there's other examples, but when you're thinking about like international workflows, people in like 6 countries all trying to share the same things, what access they have to, you know, like I've got collaborators in Turkey who can't use Discord, and I've got collaborators in other places who can't use other things. So you're constantly, like, it's not just about the, you know, the big bad sort of corporate platform. There's like all these other reasons that are like, you know, trying, and then in an art making process, I often find ourselves being like, what can we do just to get to the next thing? Like, how do we just get over this hurdle and what's available to us? And I realize maybe that's not responsible, but, you know, we still are operating within a performance paradigm where, like, you've got to show at 8 p.m. and you've got to fix the problem, and the NDI just went down, and, you know, like you scramble and you see what's available to you. So in those moments, I feel like a lot of tech ethics and morals kind of get challenged, because we don't want the show just to get like canned in a way. Yeah, it's hard.
Do you want to talk next?
You go for it.
So my mind is going in a bit of a different place. I thought this was a really helpful thing to think about. So I guess I'll just offer 2 things. One is that I'm really inspired by theater companies and artists more generally that are making visible different kinds of consumerist processes, different aspects of capitalism as they intersect with technology. I'm not sure I'm entirely convinced that technologies that we have or that we're using on a regular basis can fully resist that larger system. So myself and a number of the amazing PhD students who I work with, or many of which are sitting here, some of which are sitting here, are all kind of working on this question of how theater can be used to at least make people aware that they're in these larger systems and they're making certain kinds of choices about them, or aware, for example, of the discriminatory design that is baked into certain kinds of technologies. So one example might be the work, I'm going to just try to like name check both of the people from the last panel, 2 panels ago. So the Builders Association is doing incredible work in this area that if people aren't following, should follow. One of the pieces that I found really inspiring is a piece called I Agree to the Terms, where they invited people to participate in what they called the Builders Marketplace, which was fashioned kind of to mimic the Amazon Marketplace, where they have M-Turkers or mechanical Turkers who are the human labor that is used to train AIs. And the experience as an audience member, this is an online experience, is to go into essentially a chat room and to get trained by a real M-Turker about what they do for a living. And these are groups of people who doing remote work in rural communities, massively underpaid, but they show us basically what they do every day. So showing us the kind of backstage of technology is one answer. And then I guess my other answer, or just where my brain goes, is just thinking about this moment as an opportunity to think about the commodification of knowledge with these technologies. So again, thinking about AI, and Lucy was here earlier. Lucy's piece, Lucy AI, is an incredible piece because I think it's working against what we think, what AI is trying to do now in a particular way. Trying to commodify a particular idea of what knowledge is. And when you walk into this installation where you encounter an AI of Lucy that has been trained on her memories and is trying to, in a way, replicate but not replicate Lucy, what it does for me as a kind of audience member and a humanities scholar is it forces me to kind of encounter what it is that I think that a human is. What we are finally. So I think that to me is an anti-capitalist sort of way of engaging something like AI, which is now being, like frankly, people probably know here like that, Meta has downloaded many of our articles and books for free to use to train these kinds of things. So what does it mean for us to do that training and to train these technologies for a different reason? So that would be another example of a theatrical work that I think is doing this kind of resistant act, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. I feel like I have questions about your question.
Please.
Like when we say dominant culture, I'm like the only Black person on this panel. When we say dominant culture, what do we actually mean? Who are we actually speaking to? And whose voices are missing in that conversation become the first place I go to, and who has access to these technologies in relation to that question. And for those of us who are still like not on the cutting edge, if you will, of the advancement of technology, how are we using the technology to resist and to find a new way to use those technologies? Something as simple as music, if you look at what's happening in hip hop, in particular, which is the basis of Windrush, music in itself is really pushing resistance coming to the masses. If you listen repeatedly to a Kendrick Lamar album, not as like, this is a good vibe, which it is, but like, what is the underlying message and value that he's putting forward? I think people don't realize, number one, the amount of poetics that are coming out of there, but also he's saying fuck you to all of the people who are actually singing his song, and particularly in the projections used throughout all of his concerts. And so that's the way I think that you can also subvert this use of technology, even if it's like analog technology, if you will. And I would include the body in that as well. Yeah.
Maybe I can, and I'm not as familiar with some examples of like other experiments that you've all done, but one of the things that I'd stumbled upon with Milton and the games that we were making starting in 2017 was that we really were adamant about respecting the rules and sort of like culture of the technology itself. And I'm not sure it totally will always be transferable as like a way of subverting, but by inviting, you know, how do we play video games of a certain generation? You know, how do we bring that full thing into a commons whereby we can all respond either with the knowledge that we have. What we were interested in about video games is that they're very much cross culture, like the rich kids and the poor kids are all playing the same games, whether it's at like someone else's house or at the arcade or whatever, that there was like a really great crossover. And by positioning it in the center of the room, almost like, you know, it's the pivot point of how we are gathering around, there is some kind of perspective, I hope, that would be able to be like passed upon our relationship to it. And I can imagine in other types of forms, you know, we work with card games, we work with Dungeons and Dragons style role-play games as well. In 2021, the project that I'm here with Cole Lewis with and Sam Ferguson, like it similarly, it puts a video game in the middle of a stage, hopefully with this idea that we can say, okay, this is happening, and there's all kinds of positives and negatives to maybe how it has come into existence or how we might relate to it. And that, I mean, part of what I feel like, I mean, maybe it's just a very like Brechty kind of feeling of being like, put it there so that we can have a kind of distance and critical commentary on it, but at the same time letting it be, you know, full in its form. I feel like we were really responding to an era when people were inviting games into the theater, but they were changing them. Like they didn't want them to be games. They always wanted them to end in like 90 minutes. And so there was a kind of like dramatic surprise, like, and it's over, because like we don't want to spend the time trying to level up here together. But if we actually like let that culture in, we might be able to have a better way of understanding, well, why are people doing this? Like, what are they getting out of it? And how do we meet a dominant culture or dominant cultures that, you know, find pleasure or joy or, you know, are severely addicted to certain technologies? And that, you know, I mean, your own work, I think, is kind of like trying to say, okay, let's just put this object, our cell phones, in a particular space. I'm talking about smart. And again, sort of say, okay, acknowledging a fact of our relationship to a particular use case of technology. And let's all try to find all these other ways to reveal new perspectives on that relationship so that we can pass, for lack of better terms, pass a judgment on, I think this is good, or like, I want this way, or I am open to it, or I'm not. I want to be open or more closed, because sometimes I think we don't get the choice of whether or not we want to be open or closed to the technologies that are rapidly developing. You know, as like credit cards take over parts of like, you know, the world, and people like can't even use cash, and so then in order to have a credit card, they need to have a phone, and then they need to have a banking. Like it's like there's ways that choice of access, you don't get to choose to access it anymore. It's being imposed.
But I think beyond the access, you also need to know how a thing is built.
Mm-hmm.
And that is often what we don't see or get a chance to reckon with, because those values are implicitly built into the very system itself.
Yeah.
For sure.
So while I understand this idea of we place it out there and critique it from afar, we actually kind of need to get inside it and fucking rip it apart so that we can have a deeper understanding of it. And a different relationship with it altogether.
And expose what you learned from that too.
100%.
It reminds me, right at the beginning of it all in 2020 and 2021, a group of us got together and started experimenting, and our goal was every day just output something onto Instagram and Facebook of like, here's a weird thing we discovered that we can do. And it was actually a lot of the builders and Big Art Group and Big Dance Theater, like a whole kind of conglomerate of us. And we just were posing like, hey, we figured out how to make Luma Key happen on Zoom through Isadora and Unity. You know, like, and basically like, he'd go to this Dropbox link and here's everything that we this is how we did it. Here's all of the issues that we found with it, and here's unanswerable questions as of March 21st. And it started to bring in a bunch of people. And I remember my agents called me and like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, why are you posting this? Like, do you realize other people now can do that?" And I was like, "Yeah,
Yes.
that's the fucking point. Like, we have no marketplace for this. That's crazy that you would tell me to like." Hoard that information, like, but we're trying to get you opportunity. And I was like, right, but no, this is a moment in which literally everyone's saying there is no opportunity, and a group of us are here trying to experiment, and that comes from the spirit of builders. It's like, and what you're saying about Kendrick Lamar, of like, even if it's analog, that we are holding the technology and literally showcasing you a revolution of how to use it in an inappropriate way to go in a different direction is like no different to me than someone putting a sock on their hand and making it a Muppet, and being like, this is different. And now this entire culture is like, whoa. And then they go and do other things with it. So it's like that access point actually is the floodgates to a marketplace that clearly, however we define dominant culture, wants to suppress, because there's a lack of control when all of a sudden that floodgate opens. And that was this thing that kept happening. It was just crazy to be confronted on day 2 of that. Why are you giving this information out publicly to people you don't even know? Whoa.
We've had the same experience. I just want to say I really appreciate this because I don't know if I can say this because it's a Connected Minds event. Where's Michael? But something, this sort of makes me think of some of the work that we were doing in VR a couple of years ago with Justine and Jaina and others, where we were trying to figure out how you can call a show in VR, call a live theater show in VR, and how we wanted to make information about that. Sounds like this is exactly what you were doing, available to other theater companies. And then we were having a kind of a conversation with Connected Minds, who is totally open to this, by the way, but with a bunch of scientists who are used to prototyping things in order to make them commercializable. And we have a whole unit at our university that's, commercialization and innovation, so that we can be part of a kind of competition for X, Y, and Z, right? And I think that originally the title of this session was
Go slow and fix things.
Go slow and fix things, or move against the move fast and break things model. And Adrian had been asking us this question of like, what is the value added of having artists in this conversation? And I think this is one really concrete example that what happens when you bring artists into a kind of a scientific space, right? Or a computer science space, or a place that's where technology is dominated by other kinds of actors, is that we can ask questions about like, well, why isn't this open source, right? And what would it mean for a university to support open source development as opposed to the kind of default, which is commercialization, competition? Ultimately, that too is a kind of a resistant move against certain kinds of capitalist forces, I think.
Yes.
Right? That's what you're talking. That's what you're talking about. And I think it's the artists who are leading that charge.
Well, and it brings me back to what you were saying in the earlier conversation around the stripping away. There's a stripping away of space in. I'm speaking specifically from the U.S. academic higher education space that I existed in, so it might be different in other universities. But there was an inability at that moment to create a classroom that the rubrics were just play. Like, there were no rubrics. There was actually, it was like a maker space, and the amount of suppression of that type of space, because we had no outcome assessment. But then what that did was it created a product of like, well, then the only products I know how to create a rubric out of are from my background. And like, I don't know how this person who is thinking wildly different from me, and which is, by the way, why we recruited them, is now being forced into a mold that I'm blind to my bias at that point. Like, this is how I play. And so that's like a similar topic of like the gatekeeping of like, when we can't assess the information and have control over the outcome, there's this like slam. And that makes me really nervous about technology in a lot of ways. And gets me excited too, but totally.
This could be the moment where we add more chairs. Yeah?
Anytime.
Let's do it.
Anytime.
Let's bring in more chairs. I'm surprising everybody, but I also think, and it relates to my second question, which has to do with like,
I know, we've only made it to
I know, which is good. That's how rich these questions were. Well thought out questions. In our digital spaces, in our design savvy worlds, so much of the designer thinks about like how to remove the pain points, right? How to make it smooth, how to make it frictionless in our.
Sorry. Like, should it be smooth? Should it be frictionless?
Well, that's the question.
Okay, great.
Yeah. You're fine. You're okay.
You're in the right territory. That's what we're talking about. It was like, what does that do if we're in frictionless online spaces? When we come into our shared, what Beth calls our meet space, Beth Gates calls our meet space, like there is friction. There is social discomfort. There is physical discomfort. Ideological discomfort, and the polarization that we're seeing politically, socially, I think are related to the removal of friction and discomfort. So we have also had a long, far-ranging discussion about discomfort, friction, and its role in art making, in the audience's experience, the maker's experience. I can't remember what my question is. What do you think?
Something about that.
What do you think about that? Like, how does that change? Like, our tools change us. We make our tools, and then our tools change us. And so, as we're trying to move towards, in this room, it seems like we're trying to move towards collectivity. We're trying to move towards community, and I guess, how are you rubbing up against discomfort, even in the last couple days of navigating these physical spaces, shared spaces?
You said you were excited about this question, so maybe you should talk.
I am excited about this question because, number one, I'm uncomfortable all the time, like just as a general way of operating in the world, and all of my work, I think, or a lot of my work includes discomfort for the audience. I just finished a ballet theater hybrid piece, which is a queer adaptation of Swan Lake, and it's Tchaikovsky. It's a lot of music, a lot of instruments, and then all of a sudden we cut to the White Swan Pas de Deux, which is iconic, and we took all the music out. Silence. All you could hear were the squeaking of the ballet shoes, the breathing, the breath, and you could hear the audiences, the anal sphincters got real small. As everyone goes, there's no music. And which was interesting, because I was like, this is so great. Because I think they had to learn how to relax in that 10-minute stretch, because it went on and on and on and on. But because we're so not experienced with discomfort anymore, we retract from it very quickly and kind of violently. And so it's in part, it's me as a parent who just wants to expose people and give them the opportunity to experience discomfort in a relatively safe way, so that they can understand that they can tolerate the discomfort or the thing that they don't like. Even in Windrush, it's a take on a concept album. So we're hopping location, we're hopping time period, we're jumping like modes of communication, and it's like, does the audience get what's happening? I have to tolerate my discomfort as the maker with the audience's discomfort of not understanding everything in the moment. And that's just an exercise and a practice that I personally believe we all need more of, because I agree with you, Adrian, that like if we don't have practice with discomfort, how do we now get into an ideological conversation that feels deeply personal? So can we have those moments of discomfort that are, again, relatively safe, even if it's interacting with technology, so that when we come together and gather, we can have harder conversations that require discomfort? Because without that discomfort, you can't be relational. There's always going to be a point of friction or discomfort with any human that you're in a room with. So you, in my opinion, we actually need to exercise that muscle of discomfort more and more and more and more, if possible, so that we can actually be in conversation and in dialogue with each other. Yeah.
It also makes me think about then like doing a rigorous amount of research on what makes people comfortable in different formats, so that we are like very intentional or not intentional about the content or intentional about the form, like what makes people feel safe in a cinema or comfortable in a cinema, what makes people feel comfortable on a Zoom call and uncomfortable on a Zoom call, what makes people feel comfortable with a controller versus not a controller, so that then we the knowledge of that moment is that that is the climax of that piece, and to strip that away makes, there's this like intention to that that's beautiful, and I tend to like to, in this multi-hyphenate universe that this group is in, it allows me to kind of go to each discipline and kind of realize the history and culture of each discipline, to then kind of like reverse engineer into a new blended form. And there's something about that creates friction for me, because a lot of times when I do something of a form that I'm minimally knowledgeable in, I'm like, wait, why is everyone what? And then I'm like learning something about that moment, and
I was just thinking about one of the things that I struggle with, some like online performance stuff, or mostly because of the forced quit, like the ability, and when we're talking about being like the ability to extricate yourself for great reasons, possibly, from a situation, but you have no responsibility to, or you're not required to negotiate with anyone on the way out. And that level of autonomy, and sometimes anonymity, but not always, is like, I just have a big question about what it's like to develop performance and or just like cultivate experiences where people can, at the drop of a hat, just disappear, like exit the conversation. Again, there's lots of reasons why someone would want to do that, but what we've definitely found in something like Asses Masses, and well, are you behind? Oh, hi, right behind me. Like what we're finding as we take this around the world is that it's really hard to be an asshole in front of 200 people, and to misbehave, to do something out of like to take other kinds of like social liberties that someone might find in other spaces. And I'm not trying to like play up the idea that, oh yeah, online you're going to have all kind of like problematic behavior, but we definitely find that there is a way of negotiating entrances and exits of the social body, and that those seem really interesting as people negotiate, asking for space, asking for opportunity, and then also abdicating and saying like, I'm done, I'm going to like, but before I leave, like inviting someone else in. All those like nice things. It's almost like holding the door for people, right? And I know it's like a cliche, but like we see these kinds of things happening in space all the time. That and I'm curious how that's and that maybe that's not just like the focus. There's other types of skills and social kind of like negotiations that are being strengthened and muscles in these other spaces where there is a forced quit. But for anyone who's working in consistently in those types of spaces, what kinds of observations maybe have you seen about commitment, responsibility, listening, and how the meat sack, it engenders us or gives us the ability to, to linger and sort of disentangle differently from these political scenarios.
I think one of the challenges is that like I too am very seduced by the idea that live in-person performance is one of the potential solutions to this forced quit problem. Actually, Laurel and I have had long conversations about this. Laurel, come on up. Because and Adrian and I too, I think Adrian and I are obsessed with this question of like what happens if you force people to be in a space and to reckon with something, right? That it's harder to force quit. And yet at the same time, we see that impulse. I see as a teacher that impulse is really strong in, for example, my devised theater classes.
Yes.
Where I have students who, and I'm kind of scared to talk about this because it's politically sensitive right now, but like where students feel that they should be able to leave the room. Again, this is a live performance context. When there are things that are difficult that are being talked about, and I'm not talking about even war, I'm talking about like the word death, for example, or family. That there, and I shouldn't laugh because there are many different reasons why people would feel that discomfort, but that the default now somehow is that if it makes you uncomfortable, that you can ask the teacher or not ask the teacher to just get up and leave. Because it's a political statement to say this makes me uncomfortable, I don't feel safe with this topic, and I'm going to go. I don't know what that means at this moment.
For me, it means they don't understand the difference between a lack of safety and discomfort. Those
Right.
are two separate things.
Right.
That
Right.
get conflated a lot.
And I feel like there's such an opportunity both in education and then also in theater to push back against that and to have a really meaningful conversation about those differences. And I also want to say that I think some of it is related to technology because, and we've talked about this before, this idea of personalization that comes with Netflix, that comes with building an AI companion that will tell you what you want them to say, right? The personalization is algorithmically pushing us into these spaces where we can watch the shows we want to watch that make us feel good about ourselves, that can reinforce the values. Sarah was talking about artists being on the left earlier on. There's maybe a reason why these algorithms are feeding us more of what we're looking at. I want to understand both how we can reverse engineer this so that we can actually be in those technological spaces to encounter things that are totally different than what we would expect to encounter, but also in the theater, like what role can we play in undoing that too, so that we can be in a space with someone who has very different values, very different opinions on something, for it to feel uncomfortable and for the world not to fall apart. I don't have an answer to this, but I think we can be part of the solution in retraining our bodies, our hearts, our minds to be able to hold that kind of complexity. The world is fucked up right now. We need those skills.
What's the phrase? The quit.
Force
Sorry.
quit.
Force
Which
quit.
I realize, I guess it's a Mac user.
No.
And sometimes you do need to force quit, right? Sometimes it's, there are very, very good reasons why people need to, and yet.
I want to hear why you're seated here. I just want to add one thing to that is in the work that I was doing during the pandemic, I had never thought about the forced quit. That was something which we never spoke of because we were so afraid of it. And it's something that we actually were talking significantly about was the padded entrance. And like adding, I had to design a funeral for René Auberjonois, the chef from Little Mermaid. And his family called me and was like, we saw that you're doing all this digital stuff. Could you do a funeral for him? Because we have thousands of people who want to pay their respects. And so we had a 48-hour max Zoom call where we had 5 people in breakout rooms, each with a family member. And as a person or people came in, we put them into those breakout rooms so that they could have a personalized conversation with them. And then say, you're about to go, there's 25 breakout rooms. One is which is playing all of his films. Another is a place that on a Google Doc and you can write your, and we kind of like created this space, and it took days, it took a few days because we couldn't just be like, okay, we did the top 10 people that we wanted here. We actually had to do that for everyone. And as a result, nobody left. Like everyone was just sitting there watching together his films. And it was all about the entry, because we were so afraid that people were going to come in and be like, I'm not mad, I don't matter, I'll just call them later. And we also had right in the middle of it, the breakout rooms dissolved, and it was everyone in one room, and we spotlit the family who were actually at the cemetery to give their live remarks, and we set up like a live, and the liveness of that made everyone have the space, and it also allowed for the granddaughter who improvisation was like, I brought my guitar and I actually do want to play this song, as opposed to it being a film, because the family was like, what if we just filmed the thing? And it was like, no, there's a footprint that we need to do here, and it has to do with the meat, what is the term, meat bags?
My
girlfriend
calls it
We're in meat space.
Meat space.
M-E-A-T
Yeah.
space, 'cause
That's
we're-
great.
Our meat is walking
But
around.
anyway, just meat space.
Meat space.
Now for the world.
But this is meat
yeah.
space, but we are meat sound.
I'm no longer.
Anyway, I just wanted to put that, the
Carbon.
two ends of that
Carbon.
spectrum
Meat cute, meat.
of the entrance and the exit, the fear of the exit and the fear of the end. People just dropping in and it starting is also a challenge. So anyway.
Hi, everybody. Hello, friends online. My name is Zach. I'm coming here from University of Waterloo. I'm a first-generation Caribbean Canadian, and I work in VR and theater and performance as an artist and academic and all of the things. So thank you so much for letting me take up a little bit of space here. One of my favorite theater quotes is that theater is a safe space to explore dangerous things. So when we're talking about tension and friction and people force quitting because they're feeling that tension, they feel like they need to remove themselves. I keep coming back to this idea that it should be a safe environment to explore these difficult ideas. And part of that transaction, for me at least, is as an artist, guiding audiences through and participants through the experience. So that goes beyond an onboarding experience of here's how to use the technology, but here's what the experience will be for you. So taking out of a meat space or a corporeal existence, to borrow another Beth Catesism, and going into this not even fully digital space, but in a layered reality existence where you are still human and physical being, but you are interacting through a digital medium, right? And more importantly, arguably, is how do you then transition your audiences back out? Because you are centralizing them in an experience, especially in VR, which is where I predominantly work, so I'm coming from that very specific perspective. So forgive me if I'm missing out on some other things, but you're centralizing the experience and creating an embodied experience at best. That sometimes it's just an immersive experience for your participants and audience members, whether passive or active. And they're being confronted with subject matter, themes, images, ideas, whatever it is, actions that they have to partake in. And then in line with this kind of the narrative force quitting on them, it goes, okay, cool, well, now you've done the thing and you've completed the goal, and away you go, and back out into the world. And back out into the world for a lot of people is in their living rooms, or going on to the next part of their day and carrying that experience through with them. So what is our responsibility as artists to take care of our audience members while taking them on this journey and hopefully making them feel slightly uncomfortable, because I do think that there should be that tension there, but we need to make sure that we're caring for them so that they trust us enough to come back and continue experiencing these things and being exposed to new ideas and new stories and new images as we go through, right? And there's, I think, the tension with the force quit too is you don't necessarily know when it's the physical body or when it's the internet connection. Like if it's a Zoom play, right? Not that anyone here on this Zoom call, I'm sure, is doing right now, but but you can mute your video, you can mute your audio, and you can get up and you can leave the room and still be present. And so there's a loss or a disconnect that happens there, and there's a constant negotiation.
Totally.
And so theater is a really great, I go back to this quote and I go back to the idea of theater in these digital spaces, because we have thousands of years of ritual to help guide people through this cathartic experience, through this eye-opening experience, right? Of stepping through physical spaces, of mentally preparing and shifting gears to be ready to receive art or experience in different ways, then see a thing, and then go through a ritual to then remove from that and process through that in a space with friends, ideally. But sometimes, it's on the TTC on the way home and you're just sitting on a bus just thinking about a thing before you walk through your own door and bring that back, right? So for me, there's a little bit of a loss of that ritual, or not loss of ritual, but I think the cart has gotten a little in front of the horse, and so it's look at this cool experience without the support of the people that are actually participating in that experience in some cases, I think. And I'd be curious what other people's thoughts are and what they've seen.
Adrian, you're so good at that in your performances. Maybe you have thoughts on. But you
Soft boss.
said that you.
Adrian's like, and that's been 75 minutes.
Can you? We've had deep conversation about snacks, like in relation to this. So, thoughts?
Here she comes.
And Laurel, of course, comes up around snacks, and Laurel too, for sure. But Adrian,
I think the way I think about people coming to my shows, which are weirdo shows, like they're not conventional shows, is that I want to host them and give them a sense of that I care that they are there, that particular person. And I want to give them things that they can hold on to, familiar things to hold on to. And I want to give them unfamiliar things to do, but inside of a supported thing. And I think that, if I think about Landline, that Dustin and I really pulled a lot from the language, the conventions of theater making, act one, act two, intermission, like that, those things become the structure, the poetic structure for the experience. So comfort has to, so I do think about the comfort of the audience. And I guess I think about it because I've sat through things that are really uncomfortable, like too loud, too bright, too whatever. And if I'm out of my comfort zone, then the impacts on, the consequences of that are for me are fine. It's not the end of the world for me. But I think as I began working with artists and understanding more the ideas of inclusive design and understanding more the idea of access needs, and understanding more that the consequences for me not to have my access needs met, it's not a huge consequence. But there are people for whom, if their access needs are not met, it is that's the end of their day or the end of their life. And so to me that makes the human body actually quite, though we are robust, it's actually also quite fragile. And so there's care that is required in that moment. And then the care extends to our mental state and our heart spaces, because that's ultimately kind of like the onion. You want to be opening up that heart space and make us all cry. But that's where the magic, right, happens of the relational. Relational theater is probably the closest thing that is what I would call my practice. And snacks are important because snacks we are putting things into our meat sacks. Like we are opening. Yes.
Just take it on.
The typo we're making.
Yeah, we're opening ourselves. We're opening our mouths. We're ingesting. That it's a metaphor, and it is a actual concrete thing that we're doing. Laura, what do you think?
Well, a few things. I mean, I'm Laurel Green. I'm part of the creative team for Astas Masses here with Patrick, and I'm here at FOLDA with the show Remixed. So I think a lot about how every part of a performance is a designable surface. And I borrow a lot from Priya Parker, who talks about hosting with generous authority. And in terms of snacks, one of the things that you think about a lot on Astas Masses, because that show in concept is a big ask to an audience member. It's an 8-hour show, inspirational experience. I don't know how much you chatted about it already. So when you're coming, one of the things I always try to make sure we do is make it very clear what the invitation is. And I think that's really what we're talking about designing, is what is the invitation to participate. And if we can get you clear on the invitation, you know kind of what you're signing up for, then we can take you somewhere new. Then we can take you somewhere out of your comfort zone. So that comes with creating audience-facing documents like access guides, being really clear in your pre-show email, being very clear in your copy that this is what we're offering. And with Astas Masses, snacks are a huge part of how we sustain the 8-hour day. Because I wanted to say earlier, something I learned from Zoom as well is to not judge or reflect on an event's attendance based solely on who's there at the beginning. And we measure attrition in Astas Masses, and we have like a chart that we're collecting house counts after every intermission, and then we're saying, okay, that was a great show. We retained 85% of our audience members. Or, that show, by the end, it was a bit of a slog. We had 30%. Sometimes, depends what your starting number was, right? Yeah. But that's not I'm not judging the success metric of my show based on who's there when the curtain goes up. Metaphorically speaking, I'm judging it based on kind of what was the experience we had together. And I totally understand there are very valid reasons why people need to leave. But I also think it's important to view it against like who was there at the end and how did that feel. So with us, we have a really extensive snack rider. And when we're talking to presenters about putting on Astas Masses, they start, it's an 8-hour, okay, and it's a video game, okay, and there's one controller, okay, and there's just one plinth, there's a set, great. Okay, and now we're gonna need you to provide full buffet of snacks and a community meal. And we've created a menu that is like based on snacks that we know work in terms of people being able to get quickly during that intermission break, things that don't make your controller too greasy. And then we put together, Patrick and I
No
put together-
Cheetos, no Cheetos.
No pizza. Everyone
pizza.
thinks that's an
Everyone
easy
wants
answer, but like it isn't. It's cheap.
But it's not actually that cheap. It's not.
No, we've done the math because we also put together a sample budget for the presenter where we've got it down to the ratio of tablespoons of hummus per audience member.
Amazing.
And you can-
Calculated by attrition averaging. You want to see our budget?
It's amazing.
Ask us because we're really proud of it.
We're so proud. And so you put in the number of audience you're expecting, and then it kind of produces a grocery list. And we ask the presenter to just do a little more work than usual in terms of, and we support and help. And often, Patrick and I have been in we were in London recently at the Battersea Art Center, going down the street with our suitcases to the grocery store where we're just like taking bags of chips off the shelves. And
They didn't have enough Jaffa cakes.
Jaffa cakes. So augmenting, right, and supporting and being there to say, we'll be there, hands-on to like serve. But really getting clear about what's the portion we need, what's the vibe we're going for on those intermissions, and how do those breaks, and it's important to say the intermissions, the audience decides how long they are, because it's another part of giving them autonomy over the game. So if the group collectively says, we're gonna need, we want a half an hour dinner, or we all want an hour, or you know what, let's make this a tight 10 and then we're gonna get back in. They can do that. And then we kind of change up what we're serving along the way, really encouraging a diversity of offerings, things like falafels, things like samosas, vegetarian, vegan offerings, the shows about donkeys. I think I wrote in our rider, no conspicuous carnivorous offerings.
Or
Something like that.
food in the shape of, it's like, people always want to buy gummy bears, and I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. Also, we have this sort of no
anthropomorphized animals, so maybe you'd stray away from those. But
Can I just tag on to say something?
Absolutely.
And then Michael, pass it to you because you've joined us. We were talking about sort of how do we have something familiar or sort of welcoming so that then we can get weird?
Yeah.
Right? In the sort of, in a reductive sense. Smooth entrance and then let the friction happen. I feel like what we've ended up doing is, Asses Mass is actually full of a lot of very familiar things the whole way. Because the premise is the weird, like, in order to maintain the thing, the snacks are familiar. Like, we really thought people would go for Mountain Dew more than they do, but like we really play up like what were the things that we used to drink and eat in the basement while playing Nintendo 64 and PS2 and that kind of thing. And the aesthetics of the game really call back also to a particular generation of gaming. We take a massive assumption that the knowledge of how to use the technology is in the room. And
May not be in the player's hands.
may not be in the
but
player
it's
who is
somewhere out there.
with the controller, but someone in the
Yeah.
room knows that
Yeah.
press X is how you start things. And I feel like even as a team, we've not totally unpacked this idea of just how deep the codes of how to engage with video games persists across billions of people in this world, and the languages that we're not drawing on in other art forms, with the idea that there are billions of people who have played similar interfaces and similar narrative structures within those. So I guess I'm just offering that as an alternative, that we know that our biggest thing is how to get people in, and then how do we maintain them? Well, we maintain that by the familiar. There's surprises of the familiar. Oh, it's not getting weirder. It's not like the food gets weird. It's like something. It's like, and ice cream. You're like, yay, ice cream. Right? Like there's this sort of confirmation of maybe what people hoped for in some way, but yeah, there's an interesting way to think about, especially over that duration, how we come back to the familiar inside of a thing that feels, it is supposed to be deemed abnormal, such as playing a video game in a theater.
It feels very much like I don't know, I always come back to like, it's still site-specific performance. And like by naming it that, it actually helps me understand the questions I need to ask based on the site specificity of it. Where are the plugs? Where's the food? How do people enter? How do people walk through? And it like as an exercise, I start to like reverse engineer even just a normal proscenium theater and be like, oh right, you enter a door into a foyer and there's someone there. The Burn Factory last night, like the door was open. There was a person at the door. There was programs there. I knew I was in the right place. They said hello. They checked my name in. I walked in. There's a bar. I'll get a drink. Where's the bathroom? There's a bunch of people over there. That's probably where the performance. Like all those things are eliminated when you join Zoom. Like all of those things are gone, eviscerated. So how are you setting these things up in familiarity? What's that?
Are they eviscerated?
Yeah.
If not,
Deeply site-specific.
they're altered. I think to a
Altered.
person who
Yeah.
clicks join meeting and they're just there, you have to build those out. And I think like there's a conscious, intentional build out of like what that thing is, so that people have that familiarity of venue. Otherwise, it's not. Now on the flip side, there's a person I met in Philadelphia who has MS, has never been to a theater in their life, and in the pandemic, they were like, the one time I tried to, I had to get a driver to get me into a van, to drive me there, to drop me off. I had to go through the back dumpster door because there was no ramp. I got in, they put me in a place that never was intended for a seat. There was a beam in front of me. I was embarrassed. I went out, I had to pay for that driver to wait and then drive me home. And in the pandemic, it's the first time I just had to get to my desk and click. So like on the flip side of that, that's actually an amazing thing. And I think those two things end up being this, like the intentionality of it all, to be like, we are choosing to eviscerate all of that because this is an access point now that's exciting, and we're going to alter it so it still feels familiar, but it feels leveraged in a caretaking way. Anyway.
So this is super interesting. I want to hang on to kind of what Patrick and Jared were talking about there, because the reason I just wanted to interject here to just be like, I feel really challenged at this moment as someone who's a co-curator of a technological festival in terms of what like those big companies making these technologies are doing to the world. Like we think about the big, I don't need to really go through the big social medias. We can think about like why they're super problematic right now. I don't need to articulate it. But if you think also those same companies are the ones that are developing AI right now. Those are the ones that are building the VR headsets. Boston Dynamics is doing great work with dancing robots and also robots that kill people. And so, as someone who curates this festival, I'm starting to be really challenged that like the people who represent these companies all like sat behind Trump, like Adrienne mentioned in her opening statement. And so I feel like there's like now this big weight on all of this work to kind of really push back and deconstruct that, or else like we're just kind of like art washing what's going on a bit here. And so one thing we haven't mentioned about Asses Masses is like actually it's a Marxist show. Like there's a Marxist revolution that the audience has to engage in there. And when I talk about the show, and I was talking with Ashlyn Rose, who also you guys have put that on at the Theatre Center with, we don't really talk about the technology at all. We talk about that the show is the audience, really, and what happens to an audience over 8 hours of learning to work together. Like in many ways is that show for me. And so that really, for me, that's enough to deconstruct technology for a performance, or what you're mentioning as well, Jared, like these different ways that we can create experiences that don't just like be like, hey, isn't it cool that we now that tech is in our thing? I think is way more important than when we started this festival 8 years ago. And thought.
You came with no questions.
And I think that we're talking about where things come from, who makes the thing, who has access to the thing. We talked about who has the ability to fail, who has the ability to try the thing, to even like get in the same room as the thing. So that is a big line of thing, and this is something that we do talk about because there is that question of the artist's role in gentrifying new technologies. Right. After making Prometheus Firebrand, Annie Dorson said that was her last work using AI, that she wouldn't make another work with AI because of that feeling that the artist's role to make the questionable thing cool, to make it acceptable.
No, I just have questions. As curators, how do you define technologies?
Well, this room is a technology, right? Like our company is a social technology that we use to make some things happen. So I think that's a good thing to drill down on, because we have our mandate, or our area of interest is this intersection of live space, our body space, with digital technology, with the beeps and boops and the zeros and the ones. And we've always been very clear that it isn't just about how cool it is, but it's about how is this changing us, and interrogating it, and going like, well, not like, is this good or is this bad, because it's only binary is binary, right? That's the only thing that's binary. It is nuanced. It is mixed feelings. We can feel sad and happy at the same time. So it's incredible to be in this space, building a festival, building an industry series with the incredible technicians that we're working with, the incredible access to stuff that is cobbled together from all the universities of all the people and all of our friends to bring this thing to make an amazing Zoom live stream. So like, we're leveraging that for good? Are we leveraging it for good? Hello, computer scientists?
Not really. I just wanted to amplify a couple of things. One is your show last night was such a powerful reckoning of the fundamentally incompleteness of anything that's technological without a re-emphasis that's human. I think the parts where Marcel was re-emphasizing through mutterings, I think that was everything for me. And it actually, I came back with a whole bunch of good ideas about that. So that to me, I think, is a really, that to me is the, perhaps so far the biggest takeaway from FOLDA 25 this year. I also think that, what counts as, your question is so thought-provoking. What counts as technology, I think the elephant in the room is cloud-based, machine learning controlled AI, which is basically controlled by a few human programmers owned by companies. And we have no access to the innards of anything that's that, right? We are just interacting with an interface, and our interactions are also being taken in as data and being used in whatever way, shape, or form. And I just and there are other computer science folks in here, that's not just that is not AI. AI is a much, much bigger, expansive imagination, and some of the earliest origins of AI came when human beings actually wanted to understand how children think. And so there are romantic imaginations of AI that did not necessarily involve this level of ownership by a few companies. And that seems to be, and that's the biggest elephant in the room. And this is the critique I have for anyone who uses generative AI. And we have a bunch of, and I think right now we are all going through this moment in the academy, where in higher education, where everyone apparently now is an expert in generative AI. Right, and the irony is that even the computer scientists don't know anything about how exactly that's being controlled by Google, how exactly that's being controlled by Meta. So I think in this moment, I think the work that you're doing with Marcel really stood out to me. That's poor theater. That's just what's needed right now. I just wanted to say that.
Can I just respond quickly? I teach movement. I'm all about the body all the time. So in Windrush, the voices are disembodied. And so some of the characters are disembodied. So we spent a lot of time with, what do we do with the live actor who's so charismatic on stage? And the reason the muttering came about is because when something is disembodied, their body isn't there. And I was like, well, what is inside of our bodies? Yeah. It's the feelings. Yeah. It's your nervous system. Mm-hmm. It's all those somatic principles that are also coming to light right now. And that is literally what Marcel is playing, is the feelings of this traumatized character. And the recording is what comes out publicly. Yeah. But what's actually happening on the insides, in the guts, that we never actually see or talk about anymore because of this glossy veneer of technology all the time, and how we perform versions of ourselves for different people. But for me, theater at its core is seeing the grotesque, ugly, beautiful guts of your inside. It's taking a knife and ripping your chest open and going, see me, for all of the messiness that's inside. And that's what the muttering was supposed to be about, because I think everyone experiences that, and if we all experience that, we can all be punctured by that. Yeah. That's the sensation we're trying to chase. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
I guess the question is, can we call that technological?
I don't know.
I would say yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that this is a moment where there's a real opportunity to rethink the kind of limits of what we understand technology to be. In this festival, there's a lot of conversation about emerging technology, but my understanding is that you've always been open to a very capacious kind of understanding of tech. And, we can think about even what happened earlier in the room where Andrea created this incredible modification to allow people to sit in this room. That too is technology, and it's always been our bodies in relation to these, even costumes, technology. There's an incredible article in the New Yorker this week on whether AI will end the humanities. I don't know if anyone else has read it. I would really recommend it. And it's talking about how there is this opportunity at this moment, in a way to return to when you were saying that there are other imaginations of AI, that it could be about like to understand something about the imagination of children, or the argument is that because AI will always at some point hit a limit in relation to the human, in relation to the body, it's an opportunity in the humanities to return to certain questions about being that are fundamental. And I think that answer, in conjunction with what you're saying, Lisa, is very powerful. The other thing I wanted to say is, I don't know if you remember in this workshop we did in the fall, but Juma Periri, who's an Indigenous artist who we're working with in Connected Minds and in this project that Mo and Lucy were talking about earlier, Juma is an Indigenous artist who is based in Brazil. And when asked the question of what technology means to them in their work, it says, Indigenous people have been using technology for time immemorial, and it doesn't look like this owl, but it might be plants that have given people within their community the possibility of time travel in very, very different ways. So having that kind of expansiveness in terms of the way that we think about technology is such a gift of FOLDA, but also I think an opportunity of the AI moment. If we can focus on that as opposed to just spending all of our time talking about why AI is writing the papers for our students, right? Or why is this academic book written by AI or by this scholar? Who cares? This person is arguing like there's other things that this can open up for us. I don't know.
Yeah, and actually, Adrian, this is an anecdote from the Fleck residency at Banff Center that I did with my research lab about 4, 5, 6 years. I forgot. Anyway, so and we were hitting a bug, and we had the simulation design. It was what I would call a genre of AI multi-agent simulations. That's the genre of computing that I do, where you can basically simulate any collective phenomena without assuming anything but simple rules of interaction between people. So you can see how flocks form, traffic jams form, without a complex equation that defines the shape of the flock. Instead, you add little rules to lots of little agents on the computer, objects on the computer. And they could be like as simple as moving forward, moving backward, sensing if someone is ahead or not, and then reacting simply based on that, right? And we could not, and we were projecting on what is one of the largest screens in Western Canada. It's basically a giant wall this size. And as soon as we scaled up from the little desktop to the large screen, the people who we absolutely needed, and my life was completely dictated by their schedules, were the technicians, the electricians, right? Who do not really care about the insides of my technology. I had to learn about, and for good reasons, and I had to learn a lot about electrical connections. And in the end, my collaborator and colleague, who actually has a degree in mechanical engineering previous to her current professorship, she was the one who figured out that it was an electrical leakage that was resulting in the code overloading the CPU.
Right.
And if it weren't for that little cable acting up in a weird way, so we had to troubleshoot the entire circuitry and our code. That took us, it was a 2-week residency. We started fixing the bug on day 1, and we finally fixed it the day off the public presentation.
Wow.
And it's because we didn't even bother to think that it could be an electrical issue. That's how technology blinds us. And the irony is that it's that public showcase that got me some of the invitations that came from you, right? But what people who should be here are those electricians who are union workers and who had a 9 to 5 schedule. And by God, their 9 means 9. And I had to start my day at 6. And so that to me is, that to me is labor. And it felt like what we were doing was just having fun. And that, so the technicians are generally left out of conversations about technology.
Yeah, yes. I'm feeling my 75-minute promise
Yeah.
here, but I want to say one thing, and I don't know if SGS is still in the room.
Just walked out.
Figures, but
Force quit.
SGS used to say that especially the technicians that we work with here at FOLDA are the artists of the future. That none of this, like, we come with some ideas and often at the last minute, but they make it. And not just make it happen, but make it beautiful, and make it stylish, and make it a place that you want to be. So maybe that is the right place to leave this formal conversation, though I know that I'm hoping that these conversations are sparking other conversations amongst you all, and that tomorrow when we come together we'll be able to see some case studies, some people will be sharing their work in the laser talks, but then we've got a bunch of play time. We've got a bunch of breakout time where we can have some smaller conversations and understand and dig in a little bit more to some of the ideas that we've only touched on here, and have those other conversations that will build out of this. So I want to thank you all so much for coming in. This feels like I've been in like this time machine, but it's only been just over 75 minutes. I am not going to be in charge of the time. Yes, Michael has something.
And just some mechanical things when you're done closing.
Okay, I am closed. We are closed.
Force quit.
Just for folks that were wondering what else is happening today, so there are 2 more performances today. I think for those of you part of the startup, we imagine that many of you would go see Reflections and Refractions on Saturday if you were still here, but there is